Hello everybody, welcome to reading you another of my Alex Rider series. The third one actually, chapter 5, Flood Tiger. Alex did the only thing he could. Faced with 500 pounds of snarling tiger hurtling towards him, he fell to his knees, slid along the wooden floor and disappeared under the desk. The tiger landed above him. He could only tell its bulk, separated from him only by the surface of the desk, and he could hear its claws gouging into the wood. Two things went through his mind. The first was the sheer improbability of coming face to face with a live tiger. The second was knowledge that if he didn't find a way out of the room fast, this might be the last thought he would ever have. He had a choice of two doors. The one he had come in through was the closest. The tiger was half on the floor, half on the desk, momentarily confused. In the forest, it would have found him at once, but this world was alien to him. Alex seized it. His tarzan scrambled forward. It was only when he was out in the open, away from the scant protection of the desk, then he realized he wasn't going to make it. The tiger was watching him. Alex had twisted around, his hands behind him, his legs bent sideways in the act of standing up. The tiger's front paws were resting on the desk. Neither of them moved. Alex knew that the door was too far away. There was nowhere else to hide. A surge of anger flooded through him. He should never have come in here. He should have been more careful. The tiger roared a deep, rattling blast of air that made every nerve tingle. It was quite simply the sound of terror. And then the second door opened and a man came in. Alex's attention was fixed on the tiger, but he noticed that the man wasn't wearing costumes. He was dressed in a polo neck jersey, jeans and trainers. The clothes looked quietly, confidently expensive, and from the way they clung to the muscles in his arms and chest, Alex could see that he was extremely fit. He was young, in his mid-20s, and he was black. But there was something wrong. The man turned his head, and Alex saw that the one side of his face was covered in strange white blotches, as if he had been involved in some sort of chemical accident or perhaps a fire. Then Alex noticed his hands. They were different colours. They too were different colours. The man should have been handsome, but in fact he was just a mess. The man took in the scene instantly. He saw that the tiger was about to pounce. Without a second thought, he reached out and picked up the remote control Alex had noticed on the table. He pointed it vaguely in the direction of the tiger and pressed the button, and then the impossible happened. The tiger climbed off the desk. Alex saw its eyes begin to dim and it slumped down on the floor. Alex stared. The tiger had been transformed in seconds from a dreadful monster to nothing more than an oversized pussycat. And then it was asleep, its chest rising and falling, its eyes closed. How had it worked? Surprisingly. Alex looked back at the man who had just come in. He was still holding the device, whatever it was in his hand. For a moment, Alex wondered if the animal was even real. Could it possibly be some sort of robot that could be switched on and off by remote control? No, that was ridiculous. He had been close enough to the tiger to notice every detail. He had smelt its breath. He could see it now twitching as it returned to the forest. It had come from in its dreams. It was a living thing, but somehow it had been turned off as quickly and easy as a light bulb. Alex never felt more out of his depth. He had followed a boat with a silver scorpion, and it led him into some sort of Italian wonderland. Ci sei cosa fai qui? The man was talking to him. Alex didn't understand the word, but he got the gist. Who are you? What are you doing here? He started wishing that he had been able to change out of the costume. He had felt half naked and horribly vulnerable. He wondered if Tom was still waiting for him outside. No, he had told him to go back to the hotel. Panto spoke to him a second time. Alex had no choice. I don't speak Italian, he said. You're English? The man switched effortlessly into Alex's language. Yes. What are you doing in Miss Rothman's study? My name is Alex Rider. And my name is Niall. But that's not what I asked you. I'm looking for SCORPIA. The man Niall smiled, showing perfect teeth. With the tiger neutralized, Alex was able to examine him more closely. Without a skin problem, he would be classically handsome. He was clean-shaven, elegant, in perfect physical shape. His hair was cut close to his skull, with a pattern of curving lines shaved around his ears. Although he looked relaxed, I knew that he was already in the combat stance, poised on the balls of his feet. This was a dangerous man. He radiated self-confidence and control. He wasn't alarmed to find a teenager here in the study. Instead, he seemed to be amused. What do you know about Scorpia? The man asked. His voice was soft and very precise. I said nothing. It's a name you overheard downstairs, Niall said. Or perhaps you found it in the desk where you searching the desk. Is that who are you, a thief? No, I said, decided he had had enough. And even now someone else would arrive. It was time to go. He turned away and began to move towards the door he had first come in. If you take one more step, I'm afraid I'll have to kill you, Niall warned. I didn't pause. He heard the light football over the wooden floor behind him. Timed it exactly right. At the last moment, he stopped, swiveled around, lashing out with his heel in a back kick that should have driven into the man's abode and winding him at the very least and possibly knocking him out. But with a sense of shock, Alex felt his foot meet in the empty air. Niall had either anticipated what he was about to do or twisted away with unbelievable speed. I started full circle, trying to follow with a front jab the Kimzami Suzuki. He had learnt in karate, but it was too late. Niall had dodged again. There was a blur of movement as the edge of his hand scythed down. It was like being hit by a block of wood. Alex was almost thrown off his feet. The whole room shuddered and went dark. Desperately, he tried to adopt a defensive position, crossing his arms, keeping his head low. Niall had been expecting it. Alex felt an arm close round his throat and a hand pressed against his head. With a single twist, Niall could now break his neck. You shouldn't have done that, Niall said, talking as if to a little child. I did warn you, and you didn't listen, so now you're dead. There was a moment of blinding pain, a flash of white light, then nothing. Alex came round with the feeling that his head had been wrenched off. Even after he had opened his eyes, it took a few seconds for his vision to return. He tried to move the hand and was relieved to see his fingers curl inward, so his neck wasn't broken. He tried to play back what had happened. Niall must have let go of his head at the last moment. He had used an elbow strike, and Alex had been knocked out before he had never woken up in as much pain as this. Had Niall meant to kill him? Somehow he doubted that. In their short encounter, Alex knew that he had met a master of unharmed combat, someone who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't make mistakes. And Niall had knocked out Alex and dragged him. Niall had knocked out Alex and dragged him in here. Where was he? With his head still pounding what he saw. Alex gazed around him. He didn't like the look of what he saw. He was in a small chamber. Somewhere underneath the palace, he guessed. The walls were made of mottled plaster, and the way they sloped reminded him of a cellar. The floor had recently been flooded. He was standing on a sort of trellis work of damp and rotting wooden planks. The room was lit by a single bulb behind a dirty glass covering. There were no windows. But there were no windows. Alex shivered. It was cold in here, despite the earlier hot heat of a September evening. And there was something else. He ran a finger along one of the walls and felt a coating of slime. He had thought the cellar was painted a dirty shade of green, but now he realized that the flooding had risen further than the floor. It had continued all the way up to the ceiling. Even the light bulb had at some stage been underwater, and all as his senses so returned. Alex became aware of the smell of water in the air, and recognized the stench of the rotting vegetables, mud and salt of the Venice canal system. He could even hear water. It was lapping not on the side of the wall, but somewhere beneath him. He knelt down and examined the floor. One of the boards was loose, and he was able to swivel it enough to make a narrow opening. He stretched a hand through and touched the water. There was no way out. He turned round. A short flight of wooden steps led up to a solid-looking door. He went up to it and pressed his weight against it. The door was covered in slime too. There was no giving it at all. What now? Alex was still just dressed in the silk trousers and waistcoat that had been his costume. There was nothing to protect him against the dank chill. He thought briefly about Tom, and that gave him a little comfort. If he hadn't returned to the hotel by morning, Tom would surely raise the alarm. Daybreak couldn't be far away. Alex had no idea how long he'd been unconscious, and he had taken off his watch when he put on his disguise. Something he was now regretting. There was no sound on the other side of the door. It seemed he had no choice but to wait. He crouched in a corner, wrapping his arms around himself. Most of the gold paint had come off, and he felt ragged and dirty. He wondered what Scorpia would do with him. Surely someone, Niall or Miss Rothman, would come down, if only to find out why he had bothered to break in. Incredibly, he managed to fall asleep. The next thing he knew, he had jerked away with a crick in his neck. A cold numbness had spread through his body. Some sort of siren had woken him. He could hear it howling, not inside the building, but far away. At the same time, he was aware that something in the room had changed. He glanced down and saw water spreading across the floor. For a second, he was puzzled. Had a pipe burst? Where was the water coming from? Then his thoughts came together and he understood his fate. Scorpia wasn't interested in him. Niall had told him he was going to die, and he had meant it, what he had said. The siren was warning that there was going to be a flood. Venice had an alarm system in place all year round. The city stands at sea level, and because of the wind and the atmospheric pressure, there are frequent storm surges. These cause water from the Adriatic to pour into Venice. Venice lagoon, with the result that the canals break their banks and whole streets and squares simply disappear for several hours. Cold black water was bubbling up into the room even now. How would it go? Alex didn't need to ask. The stains on the wall went up all the way to the ceiling. The water would rise over him and he would struggle helplessly, unable to save himself until he drowned. Eventually the level would fall again and they would clear out his body, perhaps dumping it into the lagoon. He leapt to his feet and ran to the door, slamming his hands against it. He was shouting, although he knew it was hopeless. Nobody cared. He was surely was the first to end up locked here. Ask too many questions. Go into rooms where you have no right to be. And this was the result. The water had risen steadily. It must have been 5 centimeters deep already. The floor had disappeared. There were no windows, and the door was a rock solid. There was only one possible way out of here, and Alex was almost too afraid to try it, but one of the planks was loose. Maybe there was some sort of well or large pipe underneath. After all, he reasoned there had to be some way for the water to come in, and it was gushing in now, more quickly than ever. Alex hurried back down the stairs. The water level was well over his ankles, almost reaching his knees. He made a quick calculation. At this rate, the room would be completely submerged in water in about 3 minutes. He stripped off the waistcoat and threw it aside. He wouldn't need that for now. He wouldn't need a waistcoat for now. He wouldn't need that for now. He waited for 30 with his feet for the loose plank. He remembered that it was somewhere in the middle and soon found it, stubbing his toe against one side of the opening. He knelt down, the water now circling his waist. He wasn't even sure he could squeeze through, and if he did, what would he find on the other side? He tried to feel with his hands. There was an upsurge of water right beneath him. This was the source of the inflow. The water was coming directly up from some sort of opening. So this had to be the way out. The only question was, could he do it? He would have to force himself head first through the tiny gap, find the opening and swim into it. If he got stuck, he would drown upside down. If the passage was blocked, he would never make it back again. He was kneeling in front of the worst death imaginable, and the water was creeping up his spine, pitiless and cold. Bitter anger shivered through him. Was this the destiny that Yasen Gregorovich had promised him? He had come to Venice simply for this. The sirens was still howling. The water had covered the first 2 steps and was already lapping at the third. Alex cursed, then took several deep breaths, hyperventilating. When he had forced as much air into his lungs as they could take, he toppled over and plunged headfirst through the hole. The gap was barely big enough. He felt the edge of the wooden floor was biting to his shoulders. Then he was able to use his hands to propel himself onward. He was utterly blind. Even if he had opened his eyes, the water would have been black. He could feel it pressing against his nostrils and lips. It was cold. It was ice cold and stinking. God, what a way to die. His stomach had passed through the opening, but his hips were stuck. Alex twisted like a snake, and the lower part of his body came free. He was already running out of air. He wanted to turn and go back, but now a fresh panic gripped him. He realized that he was trapped inside some sort of tube with no room to go anyway, except down. His shoulders banged against his solid brick. He kicked out with one leg and was rewarded with a stab of pain as his foot hit the wall that enclosed him. He felt the current swirling around his face and neck, ropes of water that would blind him forever, and in this black death. He became aware of the full horror of the situation now, that there was no escape from it, no adult that would have been able to get this far. Suddenly, because he was smaller, that he had been able to make his way into this well shaft, whatever it was. There was no room for his maneuver. The water already touching him on every side. If the tube became any narrower, he would be stuck. He would be stuck fast. He forced himself on, forward and down, his hands groping ahead of him, dreading the metal barriers that would tell him that Niall had been laughing at him from the start. His lungs were strained, and the pressure was hammering at his chest. He tried not to panic, knowing it would only use up his hair. But already his brain was screaming at him to stop, to breathe in, to give up, and accept his fate. Forward and down. He could hold his breath for 2 minutes, and it couldn't have been more than minutes until he had taken a plunge. Don't give in, just keep moving. By now he must be 10 or 15 metres under the cellar floor. He reached out for whimpered as his knuckles struck brick. A few precious bubbles of air escaped between his lips and chased up his body, flailing past his legs. First he thought he had come to a dead end. He opened his eyes for a split second. It made no difference at all, open or closed. There was nothing to see. He was in pitch darkness. His heart stopped beating. And the moment Alex experienced what it would be like to die. But then his other hand felt the curve of the wall. Venus, at last the well shaft was bending. He had reached the bottom of an elegant J, and somehow he had to just go round his turn. Perhaps this was where it finally joined the canal. As it twisted, it tied as if the swirling water wasn't enough. I felt the brickwork closing in on him, scratching his legs and chest. He had very little air left. His lungs were straining as there were a giddy emptiness in his head. He was about to slide into unconsciousness. Well, that came as a blessing, maybe. He never feel the water rushing into his mouth and down his throat. Maybe he'd be asleep before the end. He turned the corner, his hands hit something, bars of some sort, and he was able to put his legs around. Only then did he discover that his worst fears had been realized. He had come to the end of the well shaft, but there was a metal barrier, a circular gate he was holding in. There was no way out. Perhaps it was the sense of coming so far, of being cheated at the end, that gave him strength. Alex pushed, and the metal hinges, weakened by the rust of 300 years, shattered. The gate opened. Alex swam through. His shoulders came clear, and he knew that there was nothing above him except water. He kicked down, felt the broken edge of the gate cut into his thigh. There was no pain, just a surge of desperation for a need for this to be over. He was facing up. He could see nothing, but he trusted. To his natural buoyancy to take him the right way. He felt bubbles tinkling his cheeks and eyelids, and knew that without wanting to, he was releasing the last of his breath. How far down had he gone? Did he have enough air to reach the surface? He kicked as hard as he could, scrambling with his hand, doing the crawl only vertically. Once again he opened his eyes, hoping to see light, moonlight, lanterns, anything, and maybe there was a glimmer, a web ribbon flickering across his vision. I screamed, bubbles exploding from his lips, and the scream itself erupted as he broke through the surface into the dawn light. From every side of the shoulder was clear. The water and took a huge gulp of air, then fell back. Water splashed all around him, lying on his back, cushioned by the water. He breathed again. Rivulets of water streamed down his face. I knew they would mix with tears. He looked around. He guessed it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. The siren was still sounding, but there was nobody about. And they were just Will. Alex was floating in the middle of the Grand Canal. He could see the bridge of the Academy, a vogue shape in the half-light. The moon was still in the sky, but the sun was already stealing up behind the silent churches and palaces, casting a faint light across the lagoon. Alex was so cold that he could no longer feel anything. He was aware only that the deathly grip of the canal trying to drag him down with the last of his strength. He swam across to a flight of uneven stone steps on the far side of the Grand Canal, away from the Windows Palace. What had happened? He never wanted to go near that palace again. He was naked from the waist up. He had lost his sandals, and his trousers were in tatters. Blood was running down one leg, mingling with the filthy canal water. He was soaked. He had no money, and his hotel was a train ride away outside Venice, but Alex didn't care. He was alive, and he took one last breath, and there was a palace, dark and silent. The party had long ago come to an end. Slowly he limped away. Chapter 6. Thoughts on a Train. Tom Harris sat back in the second-class carriage on the Pendolino, the fast train from Venice to Naples. He looked out of the window as the buildings and fields slipped by. He was thinking about Alex Ryder. The absence had, of course, been noticed the night before. Gray assumed he was late getting back to the hotel, but when his bed had still been empty at 10:30, the alarm buttons had been pressed. Mr. Gray had alerted the police, and then telephoned Alex's guardian, an American woman called Jack Starbright in London. Everyone at Brooklyn knew that Alex had no parents. It was one of the many things that had made him different. It was Jack who had calmed the situation down. You know what Alex is like. Sometimes he lets his curiosity get the better of him. I'm glad you called, but I'm sure he'll show up. You really don't need to worry. But Tom was worried. He had seen Alex swallowed up by the crowd at the Windows Palace, and there was something more than curiosity that had led his friend there. He knew what to do. Part of him wanted to tell Mr. Grey what the two of them had done. I still might be in the palace. He knew I need help, but another part of him was afraid of getting in trouble, and perhaps getting Alex into even more trouble than he was already in. And then he decided to keep silent. They were leaving the hotel at 10:30 the next morning, and by the time there was still no news from Alex, he would come forward and tell them where he was. In fact, Alex found the hotel at 7:30. He said, on his way to England. He had got homesick and he had decided to leave early. Mr. Grey took the call. Alex, he said, I can't believe you've done this. I meant to be responsible for you when I brought you on this trip. I trusted you. You completely let me down. I'm sorry, sir. I sounded wretched, and that was how he felt. That's not good of you. Because of you, I may not be allowed to take other kids on future trips. You're spoiling it for everyone. I didn't mean this to happen, Alex said. There are things you don't understand. When I see you next time, I'll try to explain. When I see you next time, there are things you don't understand. When I see you next time, I'll try to explain to you as much as I can. I'm really sorry, sir. And I'm grateful to you for the way you've helped me this summer, but you don't have to worry about me. I'll be all right. There are lots of things Mr. Grey wanted to say, but he stopped himself. He had got to know Alex well in all their hours together and liked him. And he also knew that Alex was like no other boy he had ever met. He didn't believe for a minute that Alex was homesick, nor did he think he was on his way back to England, but sometimes, occasionally, it was better not to ask. Good luck, Alex, he said. Look after yourself. Thank you, sir. The rest of the school party had been told that Alex had already left. Miss Bedford had packed his bags for him, and everyone else had been too busy sorting out their own things to think about him anymore. Only Tom knew that Alex was lying. He had been sharing a room in the hotel, and Alex's passport was still on the bedside table. Actually, Tom had taken it with him. He had given Alex his brother's address in Naples. There was still a chance he might show up there. The scenery flashed past, as uninteresting as scenery nearly always becomes when he's seen through the grimly window of the train. Tom had parted company with a school party outside the hotel. They were flying back to England. He had a ticket to Naples where his brother would be ready to meet him. He had about 6 hours to kill. There was a Nintendo DS in his backpack and a book, Northern Lights. Tom didn't much like reading, but everyone in his class had been told they had to get through at least one novel during the summer holidays. There was just a few days left until the start of term, and he was only on page 7. He wondered what had happened to Alex, and why would Alex had been so determined to break into the Windows Palace in the first place. As the train rattled on, leaving the outskirts of Venice behind him, Tom thought about his friend they had met 2 years ago. Tom, who was about half the size of anyone else in his class, had just been beaten up. This was something that seemed to happen to him quite often. And the case was a bunch of 16-year-olds led by a boy called Mitchell Cook, who had just suggested he should use his lunch money to buy them cigarettes. Tom had politely refused, and a while later Alex had come across him sitting on the pavement, picking up his tattered books and wiping blood from his nose. You okay? Yeah, I've got a broken nose. I've lost my lunch money. They told me they're going to do it all again tomorrow. But otherwise, I'm fine. Mike Cook. Yeah, maybe I should have a word with him. What makes him think he'll listen to you? Got away with words. I should make the bully and 2 of his friends behind the bike the following day. It was a short meeting, but Mitchell Cook never bothered anyone else. It was also noticed that for the following week, he limped and spoke in a strangely high-pitched voice. That was the start of a close friendship. Tom and Alex lived near each other and often cycled home together. There were lots of teams together. Despite his size, Tom was extremely quick on his feet. When Tom's parents started talking about divorce, Alex was the only person he told. In return, Tom probably knew about Alex than anyone at Morgland. He had visited his house 3 times. He had met Jack, the cheerful, red-haired American girl who wasn't exactly his nanny or housekeeper, but seemed to be looking after him. Alex had no parents. Everyone knew that Alex had lived with his uncle, who must have been rich, judging from the house. But then he had died in a car accident. It had announced in school assembly, and Tom had gone round to the house a couple of times, hoping to find Alex, but she had never been in. After that, Alex had changed. It had started with his first long absence from school in springtime, and everyone assumed that he must have been knocked off balance by his uncle's death. Then he disappeared again in the summertime, but there was no explanation. Nobody seemed to have any idea where he went. When the two of them finally met again, Alex had Tom was surprised how much his friend had changed. He'd been hurt. Tom had seen some of the scars, but Alex seemed to have gotten a lot older. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, as if he'd seen things he would never be able to forget. And now with the business at Venice, maybe Mrs. Bedfordshire was right after all. Alex did need to see a shrink. Tom reached for his Nintendo DS, hoping to put the whole thing out of his mind. He knew he ought to continue with the book. And he promised himself he would go back to it in 200 or 300 miles' time after they had gone through Rome. He became aware that someone was standing over him and automatic fumbled for his ticket. He looked up and gaped. It was Alex. He was dressed in old-fashioned jeans and a baggy jersey, both one size too big. He was dirty, his hair matted and untidy. Tom glanced down and saw that he was barefooted. He looked worn out. Alex! Tom was almost too shocked to speak. Hi. Alex gestured to an empty seat. Do you mind if I join you? No. Sit down. Tom had a whole table to himself, which was just as well. The other passengers were staring in Alex's horror. How did you get here? What happened? Where did you get those clothes? Suddenly the questions were tumbling out. I'm afraid I stole the clothes, I confessed. I nicked them off the washing line. Couldn't get any shoes though. What happened to you last night? I saw you go to the palace. Did they find you? Did you fall in the canal or something? Alex was too tired to answer any of his questions. I've got a favour to ask you, Tom, he said. Do you want me to hide you from the police? I need to borrow some money. I couldn't buy a ticket. I'm going to have to get some new clothes. That's okay. I got plenty of money. And I need to stay with you while your brother for a while. Is that going to be all right? Sure, Jenny won't mind, Alex. But Alex had stumped forward, his head cradled in his hands. He was sound asleep. The train picked up speed, curving round the Gulf of Venice and continuing its journey south. When Alex woke up, the train was still travelling through the Italian countryside. He slowly uncurled himself already. He was feeling better. The train had just left Venice behind. It had carried him away from his experience of the night before. He sat up and saw Tom staring at him. A sandwich, a bag of crisps and a Coke sat on the table between them. I thought you'd be hungry, Tom said. I'm starving, thanks. Alice opened the can of Coke. It was lukewarm, but he didn't mind. Where are we? He asked. We went through Rome about an hour ago. I think we'll be there quite soon. Tom waited while Alex drank, put his book down. You look terrible, he commented. Are you going to tell me what happened last night? Sure. Alex decided before he even got on the train that he wasn't going to even have to tell Tom everything. It wasn't that Destiny needed Tom's help. He was tired of lying, but I'm not sure you'll be going to believe it, he added. I've been reading my book for the last 2.5 hours, Tom said. And I'm only on page 19, so I think I prefer listening to you, whatever you got to say. All right. Alex had only ever told one person the truth about himself, and that had been his friend, Sabina Pleasure. She hadn't believed him, not until she found herself knocked out and tied up in the basement of a country mansion owned by an insane multi-millionaire Demain Quay. Now Alex told Tom everything he had told her, starting with the truth behind the death of his uncle, and continuing all the way up to his escape from the flooded chamber the night before. The strange thing was that he enjoyed saying the story. He was boasting about being a spy, working for a secret intelligence. Quite the opposite for them. For too long, he had been a servant of MI6, forced by them to keep quiet about everything he had done. That even made him sign the official Secrets Act by telling the truth. He was doing exactly what they didn't want him to do. It came as a relief, a great weight off shoulders that made him feel that he wanted to go back home. couldn't go back to the hotel, not without money, nor without shoes, but I knew you were taking the train to Naples, so I walked up to the station and waited for you. I followed you onto the train, and here I am. I finished and waited nervously for Tom's response. Tom had said nothing for the last 20 minutes. Would he, like Sabina, walk out on him? Tom nodded slowly. Well, that makes sense, he said. At last, Alex stared. You believe me? Can't think of any other reason to explain everything that's happened, missing so much school and all those injuries. I mean, thought your housekeeper might be beating you up, but it doesn't seem likely. So yes, you must be a spy. That's pretty heavy, Alex. I'm glad it's you, not me. Alex couldn't help smiling. Tom, you really are my best mate. Happy to help, but there's one thing you haven't told me. Why were you interested in SCORPIA in the first place? And what are you doing now? Coming to Naples? Alex had met his father. That was the only one area that still troubled him. It's too private to share with anyone. Got to find SCORPIA, he began. He paused and continued heavy. I think my dad has been some sort of involvement with them. I never knew. He died shortly after I was born. Did they kill him? No, it's just difficult to explain. I want to know about him. Never anyone who knew him. Even my uncle had never talked much about him. I just have to know who he was. At Naples? I heard Miss Rothman talking about a company in Amalfi. That's not too far from Naples. I think it's called Consanto. I saw the name in a sort of brochure on the desk, and the person she was talking to had this photograph inside. She said she'd be there 2 days. That's smart. I'd be interested to know why. But Alex, Tom found, he met this black guy Niall. Actually, he wasn't exactly black. He's more sort of black and white. Well, remember you mentioned SCORPIA. He locked you in a cellar and tried to drown you. Why go back at me? It sounds to me that they're not that keen to meet you. Oh no. I just couldn't deny that Tom was right. And he had learned very little about Miss Rothman. He couldn't be certain that she was connected to SCORPIA. The one thing that he did know was that she, or the people who worked for her, was at her left ruthless, but he couldn't leave it yet. Yasen Grigorovich had showed him a path. He had followed it to an end. I just want to take a look at, that's all. Tom shrugged. Well, I suppose you can't be in any worse trouble than you are with Mr. Gray. When you get back to school, I think he's going to murder you. Yeah, I know. He didn't sound too happy on the phone. There was a brief silence. The train rushed through a station, a blur of neon and concrete without stopping. It must mean a lot to you, Tom said. Finding out about your dad? Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. My mum and dad have been shouting at each other for ages. All they ever do is fight. Now they're splitting up and they're fighting about that. I don't care about either of them anymore. I don't think I even like them. For a brief moment, Tom looked sadder than I'd ever seen him. I think I understand what you're saying, and I hope you find out something good about your dad, because right now I can't think of anything good about mine. Jerry Harris, Tom's elder brother, met them at the station and took them by taxi to his flat. He was 22 years old and had come to Italy on his gap year, but he had somehow forgotten to return. Alex liked him immediately. Jerry was totally laid back, thin to the point of scrawny, with bleached hair and lopsided smile. It made no difference to him that Alex had turned up uninvited, and he didn't comment on Alex's appearance on the fact that he seemed to have made the journey from Venice without shoes. He lived in the Spanish quarter of the city. It was a typical Naples street, narrow with buildings 5 or 6 stories high on both sides, and washing lines strung out between them. Looking up, Alex saw fantastic patchwork of crumbling plaster, wooden shutters, ornate real railings, windows, boxes, and terraces with Italian women leaning out to chat with their neighbours. Jerry was renting a top-floor flat. There was no lift. The three of them climbed a twisting staircase with a different smell and stand on each floor. Disinfectant and a baby crying on the first. Pasta and a violin playing on the second. This is it, Jerry nodded. I'm not going to make yourself at home. Home was an open plan space with hardly any furniture, white painted walls, a wooden floor, and views over the city. There was a kitchen in the corner, every surface piled high with dirty plates, and a door into a small bedroom and bathroom. Somehow, someone had dragged a battered leather 3-seated sofa all the way up. It sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by a tangle of sports equipment only some of which Alex recognised. There were 2 skateboards, ropes and pythons, an oversized kite, a monoski, and what looked like a parachute. Tom had already told Alex that his brother was into extreme sports. He was teaching English and his 4G language in Naples, but only to pay for his trips in mountaineering, surfing, or whatever. "You too hungry?" Jerry asked. "Yeah." Tom slumped down on the sofa. "We've been on a train for like 6 hours. You got any food?" "You've got to be kidding." "No. We'll get some pizza or something." How's things, Tom?" "How are Mom and Dad?" "The same." "As bad as that?" Jerry turned to Alex. "Our parents are completely crap. I'm sure my brother's told you. I mean, calling him Tom and me Jerry. How crap can you get? He shrugged. "What are you doing here, Alex? You want to visit the coast on the train, Alex?" On the train, Alex had impressed Tom the importance of not repeating anything he'd said. "9 Wednesdays," Tom announced. Alex is a spy." "Is he?" "Yeah, he works for MI6. Wow, that's awesome." "Thanks." Alex wasn't sure what to say. "So what are you doing in Naples, Alex?" Tom answered for him. "He wants to find out about a company called Consanto," Alex said. "Consanto Enterprises." Jerry opened the fridge and took out the beer. Alex noticed that apart from the beer, there was nothing else in the fridge. "You know about them. I used to have one of their people learning English. He was a research chemist or something. I hope he was better in chemistry than he was a linguist, because his English was awful." "Who are Consanto?" I thought. "They're one of these big pharmaceutical companies. They make drugs and biological stuff. They've got a plant near Amalfi. Can you get me in?" Alice was hopeful. "You've got to be kidding. I doubt the Pope could get in. I drove past once, and it's this really high-tech sort of place. It looks like something out of a ski film, and it's got all these fences and security cameras and stuff. They must have something to hide," Tom said. "Of course they've got something to hide, you dimwit," "All these drugs companies are coming up with new patents, and they're worth a fortune. I mean, like if someone discovers a cure for AIDS or something, it would be worth billions. That's why you can't get in. The guy I was teaching never said anything about his work. He wasn't allowed to." "Like Alex." "What?" "Being a spy. He's not allowed to say anything about that either." "Right." Let's look from one to the other. Despite the fact that there were 8 years between them, the 2 of the brothers were obviously close. He wished he could spend more time with them. He felt more relaxed now that he had in a long time. But that wasn't why he was here. "Can you take me Amalfi?" he asked. "Sure." Did he finish his beer? "Haven't got any lessons tomorrow. Will that be okay?" "It would be great. It's not that far from Naples. I can borrow my girlfriend's car and drive you down from there. You can see Constanta for yourself, but I'm telling you now. Alex, there's definitely no way in."